So, hey everyone, big welcome back to our next Balancing Acts live webinar. Free to access. The recording will also be available on my YouTube channel within 24 hours of this going out live. Thank you for joining us live. This is being recorded until a point, and that point is after around 45 minutes when we come back to the room for any questions from our live audience today. For the confidentiality of the room, we will stop recording at that point. But today we're talking about navigating belonging and inclusion. If you've never been to a Forging People event before, we do things a little bit differently here. It's very informal, it's very human, so you can kick back, relax, eat your lunch, have a coffee. There's no rules, it's fine. You can just relax and kick back. But if you have any questions for our fantastic guests today, please do save them up to that 45-minute mark and we'll ask them then, because A, I'm rubbish at multitasking, and B, it gives you a chance to have that lunch as well. But also you'll give people a chance to reach us away from here as well. And if you do want to use the chat box to introduce yourself and say who you are and where you're from, that'd be fantastic, just so we know who we're dealing with and where in the world you are from. So, Forging People are essentially a learning and development company, but we do things very differently. We do lots of different things, and all of this will be on the handouts. I'm not going to go into this. But we work with lots of different people in lots of different spaces. So we do a lot of work in organizational space, people leaders. We do a lot of work in the front line. Also, myself, I'm the host and creator of KFC TV. I trained all my life for that gig, 6'4", 24 stone, hosting a fried chicken TV station. Dream gig or what? There we go. But also do a lot of work with the emergency services, with frontline, Ministry of Defence, and lots of different environments. So wherever you are from and work, however you are joining us, I guarantee there'll be something in this for you, not only from my experiences, but also that of my guests as well. My career comes from mental illness. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. Later on in life, I developed generalized anxiety disorder. And essentially, my career was built on the back of that. I share my experiences of both of those things. Sharing lived experience. But for me, lived experience is the perfect vehicle to drive engagement. But actually, it's really important to have that solution-focused angle as well. Especially when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and belonging. Trust me, as a 46-year-old white guy, there is so much in this world I do not understand. And this is a great way for me to learn more, to get people on that know their stuff, so we can have a really open conversation about this and start to ask better questions. And for me, that's where it all begins. Is if we don't understand something, we want to understand something, ask better questions. And I guarantee you, no one has ever been offended by me asking a question, because it's always been asked from a genuine need of curiosity or education, or sometimes intrigue as well. That works too. And my first specialist today is the wonderful Gamu. So Gamu, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. So I'm Gamu Matarira, and I am the founder and CEO of Gen A Consultancy, which is actually an Africa-facing business where we help businesses, international businesses that don't feel comfortable navigating those massive details associated with internationalization by themselves. So we help them to expand end-to-end into Africa with their products and services. But I also work with business leaders on the continent as they develop themselves as competitive businesses with the rest of the world. I'm also the co-founder of African Leadership Global, where we're attempting to come up with a new African leadership framework that works for the African continent. And I've also recently joined the Smart Learning Technologies team, where we help the workforce in their pursuit of a life well lived through learning. So multiple hats. Yeah.
If you buy a TV, you have a quieter life. No, great work there. Really well done. And Gamu, it's such a pleasure to have you on. This photo was taken from the Find Your Voice event, which you were amazing at, by the way. I love this picture. And joining you is the wonderful Charlotte. Charlotte, so good they named them 3 times. Charlotte, Phillips-Lynn. Over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, got to follow Gamu now, but yeah, so I think some of you might know me anyway, but I'm Charlotte. I'm an LGBTQI plus advocate, keynote speaker, and hugely passionate about inclusivity. I started up my company Question Normal back in March last year, just because, for a few reasons. One, for a consultancy element, maybe Gamu, similar to yourself there, around inclusivity, belonging. But my advocacy is very personal. So my experience is shaped by who I am as a person, which is a queer, non-binary individual who has celiac disease, a severe hearing loss, OCD, and generalized anxiety disorder. And I talk about my lived experience as the human I am.
Love that. And I felt like giving you a really weird high five with the OCD and GAD thing. It sounds weird, but go with me. We know each other well enough for that to be a good thing. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, a pleasure to have you here, Charlotte, as well. When I was thinking about this topic, I wanted to approach it from a couple of different angles, and you two guys both sprung to mind straight away. From the work that you do, the experiences you have, and I think that's such a crucial part. It's not just your specialisms and the solution-focused stuff that you put out into the world. Actually, it's your ability to share your experiences as well. So let's tackle right from the start the nuances of belonging and inclusion. How do we understand something which actually can be quite overwhelming if it's not something we're really tuned into naturally or generationally?
Okay,
let's go with you first.
Shall I start? Okay. So I think with most concepts, we have to start by unpacking what we actually mean by belonging and inclusion. I think when we look at the words individually, they seem quite straightforward, and we all think, oh yeah, I know what that means. But what does it mean in context, particularly in the context of like the workforce? And I think when we're talking about belonging, we use it so widely and quite loosely, but it actually has quite broad meanings, and it can be thought of in terms of our attachment to a particular social group, like our communities, our families, the national community that we're a part of. But it can also be our attachment to a particular place. So where we've sort of lived, grown up, spent a lot of time in, and we have to think about it from the perspective of ourselves as individuals, but also from the perspective of groups, because the meaning differs, right? So if I think of my experience being a Black woman of Zimbabwean heritage who was born in Edinburgh, started life in Leeds, and then lived in about 32 different countries. And my journey of trying to find belonging in all those spaces, without actually really consciously thinking about it, you sort of end up in different spaces, different environments, and you're thinking, well, I'm here and I need to make it work. And how do I do that? I can't do it on my own. I sort of do it in the context of the people around me, the support that I have around me. And if that's sort of missing, that's when we start to feel a bit lonely and a little bit like we're isolated, excluded from the group, from the community, and all sorts of things sort of spiral, I think, from there. So I think it's something that everyone experiences quite uniquely, this feeling of belonging. Don't take it for granted that because we're in the same office, we're in the same department, we're in the same company, that automatically, we all have this sense of belonging. There are nuances that I think only come from truly understanding each individual's experience, but also the team's experience or the group's experience collectively.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things, actually, of many that really stood out from your keynote that I heard was it wasn't just the visibility element of race in your example, it was actually how you spoke. So actually, that would actually become a non-inclusive thing because you had elegancy and you would speak very differently to everybody else. So it's a really strange thing to actually throw into the mix because it's not something I automatically kind of lump in with inclusion in that sense, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you a very, very quick example. So when I went to Zimbabwe for the first time, now bear in mind I had a northern accent. I didn't even speak like this. I definitely sounded Yorkshire. And my name, Gamchirai Matarira, is a traditional Zimbabwean name. So coming from the UK and arriving in Zimbabwe, meeting family, and then realizing they don't accept you because you're different, but you see them visibly as the same, but they see you as different. And it's not like you can even hear yourself as a young person. You just sort of think, well, I'm just speaking English like everybody else. So the way I spoke automatically put me in a different lane to everybody else. I was bullied, believe it or not, for speaking differently, dressing differently, and just not, I guess, showing up culturally the way they did because I wasn't born and raised in the same place as they were. So that was very strange to me because I was always a friendly person that was always looking to make friends, and it was
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Gamu. Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for sharing that as well. And again, over to you, Charlotte. I mean, the work that you do through questioning normal By the way, amazing name. The work that you do really does kind of shine a light on belonging and inclusion. What's your take on this? What's kind of your kind of take on the nuances of this?
I think, potentially if you were to look at a dictionary definition of them both, they're actually very similar, but I think they're actually quite different. I think it's easy to include people like from a workplace setting, more from like a tick box exercise, but actually that sense of belonging goes a lot deeper. And for someone to feel like sure that they belong in a company is actually quite a huge thing. And I think that goes that one step ahead of inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think from a mental health perspective, which obviously is a world that I kind of operate in, that one of the biggest realizations I've had when it comes to belonging actually is that link, the link of people that are experiencing mental health challenges, certainly mental illness. There is that link between sexuality, gender, race, and all these other things, walks of life, ways of life, is that when we have mental health challenges, we don't feel that we deserve to be any better or any greater than where we are now. We don't feel like we deserve to have even the space we are in, but certainly have a platform to have a voice, to share an opinion. And for me, that's been a quite transformational insight, is to understand the link between everything that we do and belonging. But also we see it in our respective worlds. We see this in workplace environments for sure. What's the impact of not doing this stuff well on a workplace or a workforce, for example, or workplace culture?
Yeah, so I mean, the bottom line is discrimination fosters environments where marginalized individuals in particular feel excluded. Now, if you think of why you bring a workforce together, you're trying to create this army of assets, right? The assets that are going to contribute to the organization's performance and position in the market. So it's almost counterintuitive to create an environment that excludes the very people you rely on. Because once somebody feels isolated, how are they going to bring their best self to the table? They're not going to want to speak up. They're not going to want to offer their creative ideas and suggestions. They probably will not be a part of the team, which means collaboration is hindered, teamwork is hindered. So it's actually counterproductive, in my opinion. If we're thinking about the bigger picture, we have to align the values, our mission, our vision of our organizations with the practices and the day-to-day experiences of the people within it that actually help you to meet those particular goals and aspirations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gamu. From your perspective, Charlotte, I think with regard to the LGBTQ plus community, with identity, with pronouns, with all the things are, what should we say, newer in the workplace kind of radar. Are you experiencing greater challenges coming in kind of much later than other challenges we've had around discrimination? To be able to change beliefs, to win over mindsets, that kind of thing. How is that looking in terms of being a much newer subject that we're tackling in comparison to a lot of the kind of the age-old challenges, sadly?
Yeah, I'd say like the sexuality aspect of it, to be honest, is kind of, it's always been there to a certain degree, and people are understanding of that, and they kind of get on with it. I think the gender aspect is where it's just a little bit different now, because it's so fluid and there's so many different genders that people can choose from. Like, I think depending on what statistics you look at, there's maybe about 100. So I think it's the understanding of having the knowledge of all of those. But fundamentally, from a business point of view, having people from different backgrounds will make your business a lot more profitable and a lot more diverse in general. And like Gamu, you said about bringing different ideas to the table and things like that from different people's backgrounds and walks of life, to be able to do that.
Fantastic, thank you. This is such a big topic. This is just one section. So what I'll do is the follow-up email to this, or if you're watching on the record, do look up my podcast episode, the Nick Elston Show, with Gamu and also with Charlotte, where we talk very openly around this and the challenges and also the life stories as well, which quite seamlessly for me does lead me into the next bit. How do you both leverage your experiences, your personal experiences in the work that you're trying to do, the transformational work, that kind of winning people over, creating positive impact? I know both of you use your personal stories and experiences, and also emotionally led experiences in what you do. How do you do that? How do you engage people using personal stories from your perspectives. And Charlotte, if we could start with you on this one, please.
Yeah, I think I definitely noticed a shift when I started talking about my own personal experience, because I think it might not necessarily be directly relatable to someone, but likely someone knows someone who might be queer or might have a disability, or might have a mental health condition or something like that. So therefore I think it makes it more relatable, and it's also the power of talking with emotion and being able to kind of like really hit the people. Like, goes back to what you said, like let's go for it, but like really hit the people hard in a certain way, I guess.
Yeah.
For them to kind of listen to your story and understand how small differences could make a big change to someone's life and so forth.
And that's exactly it. I mean, you've delivered a talk in front of a room full of financial planners, for example, an industry which, by and large, is maybe one of the last bastions of traditional business in that sense, although we both belong to a community, Next Gen, which are very much bucking that trend in that sense. But how did you ever encounter any objections or pushbacks when you've been sharing your experiences to, certainly to say, corporate environments?
I think I'm lucky that I haven't. There's been a couple of scenarios where podcasts I've done, there's been comments made, but I think, in reality, they probably haven't listened to the podcast because they're quite uneducated. Comments that have been said. I think there was always like the odd muttering of being like, oh, here we go again, we're talking about D&I and so forth, but thankfully nothing sort of directed at me, which is good.
Why do you feel people are so defensive sometimes around the introductions of things like pronouns and identity?
Well, that's a big question.
It's a big question, yeah, and completely unscripted. So if you haven't got an answer for that, either.
No, I think there's.
This is one of those rabbit holes that I mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, yeah. How long have we got? Yeah, I think it's potentially just the like uneducation. That's not even a word. Like, I think the lack of education around it, because I think when they get more confident with it and understand it a bit more, they're less defensive. I think it's more of it's an unknown topic or sprung upon them, and therefore, it's kind of like a panic mode potentially.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that what ties in with this, actually, by sharing your story, you humanize the experience. It's not just, like I say, that kind of rinse and repeat kind of statistics of D&I, for example, that you're just throwing at people. Gamu, same question to you, please. You have a very powerful personal story as well. You interweave that with your business talks and pitches and presentations. How does that land with people maybe that are not like you in that sense?
So I think that the biggest thing is to show up as your authentic self. You have to be comfortable enough to just sort of, sit in your shoes, stand in your shoes, and sort of say, well, this is my story. And fascinatingly, what tends to happen is the least likely people will resonate with what you have to say. So I think for me, I probably represent.
Oh, you've gone on to mute, Gamu.
Apologies.
No
so I think I represent several things. I think for some people, they look at me as, oh, there's this woman that did certain things in environments that are quite difficult for women to be in, such as, I don't know, the Middle East, for example. Other people look at me as a Black person, or how did you, live and navigate life in Japan, for example, when I lived there. So I think it's sort of a combination of when you've walked the talk and you come at it from a position of experience. Yes. People have a respect for what you have to say, because I'm not just lecturing, I'm actually telling you from a real experience, and I probably can help you too from that perspective. So it does come down to, I mean, you taught me, Nick, to be vulnerable when you're speaking, and to not be afraid of showing the world who you truly are, and you'll be surprised what comes back. It can be scary, but for the most part, it's been positive reception. Absolutely.
I can't work with these people, by the way. They're far too smiley, these people on the image right now, but there we go. This is kind of in-joke between myself and Charlotte around kind of rainbows, and actually kind of companies and workplaces, the use of rainbows to signal everything that they're doing towards workplace initiatives. I guess rainbows aside, because I'm so frightened to ever use a rainbow on any of my stuff now. I was tempted to do it for this slide, but there we go. Rainbows aside, what can organizations and people leaders do to start to implement real kind of foundation stone strategies in the workplace from both of your perspectives? And Gamu, if we could start with you on this one, please.
So I'm a big fan of stories. I think we have to go past the demographic data, and we have to hold spaces where people can actually share their stories. I think it's the only way you really can connect and understand people's true experiences and who they really are. And you'll be surprised what you learn about the person sat next to you at work. But I also think on a really serious note, we have to start identifying relationship specific bottlenecks in the organization. So why is it that it's very difficult for, say, managers, subordinates to communicate effectively? What's going on from peer to peer? And only then can you really tackle what's really happening. Because I think when you look at current policies and procedures in organizations, some of them are quite outdated or not even understood very well. How do I actually connect to that? How do I make use of it when I need support or when I need an ally? It needs to be humanized a bit more. And the only way to do that is to set up spaces where people feel safe enough to share, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and know that they'll be supported if they do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that human to human conversation.
Absolutely.
But that goes against everything. Certainly as a 47-year-old person back in the day being trained through my kind of business and corporate training, I was kind of told to lead through instruction. It's very general. So you tell everybody what to do and they'll do it. Doesn't work, by the way. We're doing it anyway. But you're right. Actually, it's about human to human conversations. If you've got a team of 10 people, 10 different conversations. I mean, just touching the surface of this, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. This morning I was on a call and we were talking about men's mental health, and we were talking about suicide, and actually in certain Asian religions, actually the word suicide cannot be used because of the shame and the stigma attached to it. So it needs to be dressed up in a different way, approached in a different way, because it wouldn't be recognized in the same way as we would talk about it here in that sense. So we wouldn't know that if we were being general. So I love human to human conversations, and one of the biggest ambassadors of that is Charlotte. So Charlotte, over to you, please.
Amazing.
I think just to piggyback on what you've both said, to be honest, because I think if you ask someone to do so, or you ask 10 people to do something, they're probably all going to do it a bit of a different way, because of just how people's brains work and logic and things like that. I think definitely what I advocate for with strategies in the workplace is about inclusive communication. And how you're not singling people out, because by being very exclusive of people, you're then excluding in conversations. So by having and going back to policies there and having it so that you don't just split it as maternity and paternity leave, like you have it as parental leave. I've seen some policies that do actually relate to parental leave, but then actually go down to still say maternity and paternity within that. So it's just being a bit mindful, I think, of what your workforce looks like. And like you say, everyone's human, and having that human-centric approach to it is definitely important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlotte. So the importance of intersectionality, and also, heads up, I had to Google this. Always best to be honest, right? But I think actually it was such a fascinating subject. So I wanted to read up more on it, because it's kind of like we are maybe educated to be general, as I said, that generalist approach, but actually, why is it important to have awareness of intersectionality and also things like classification? Because actually that can tune into things like unconscious bias and all the other things that happen below the surface. Have either of you had that experience of how that could work or also doesn't work in organizations or in life generally?
So I think I think the bottom line for me, sorry, my neighbour's gardening. Is that making noise for you?
No, we're all good.
Oh, that's all right, good.
Helen's come back to everyone afterwards, though, because I've got a lot of things happening.
I just heard the lawnmower going off. But yeah, I think the bottom line is we're not all the same. I think when I think of intersectionality and how it affects me as an individual in a space, there are assumptions around who I am because of what I look like. Now, because I'm a Black woman, it doesn't necessarily mean I've had the Black female experience of the Black women maybe you've experienced in the past. So I often come across Black women who feel like they're labeled as being quite aggressive because they're very confident and outspoken. And actually, they're just passionate, for example. So I think what's really strange sometimes when I've been in a situation like that is when people realize I'm or tell me, "Oh, you're not what I thought you were," and I'm like, what did you think I was, and why are we bringing stereotypes to the table rather than starting with a question? Well, hello, Gamu, nice to meet you. Tell me a bit about yourself, and get to know who I am. So I think it's an interesting one because we don't always look like what we've been through.
Yeah. But I find it really fascinating, again, from that human perspective, from somebody outside of this world looking in, that we're all kind of encouraged to treat everybody the same, but actually that's quite damaging in that sense, from that classification kind of element of people, and like I said, the different experiences of people, and certainly we had that experience last week, even in terms of the events that happened in Southport and the misinformation. And then that kind of spiraled all out of control. We will come on to that, but I think it's a really important topic. We all agreed before this. It's a really important time to talk about this stuff. So we will come on to that before we go. But thank you for that. And Charlotte, please.
I think the word intersectionality is such a great thing. I think it does go back to assumptions of like, oh, you don't look deaf, or you don't look like this. Maybe just kind of add into the you don't look like the experiences you've had almost, or people live with chronic conditions day to day, or even generalized anxiety and OCD. Like there's that OCD of, oh, I've got a little bit of OCD because I clean the kitchen a certain way, and it's not necessarily about that. So it's intersectionality is very powerful. You can be this person, you've got many hats, you've got many experiences. So I think intersectionality is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. I think Channel 4's OCD cleaners have got a lot to answer for, to be fair. They're kind of promoting it as a really kind of fun, it's a fun thing. Really not, genuinely not. So navigating challenges and opportunities. Obviously, we do not live in a Disney movie. Sorry to break this to everybody. Things will go wrong. People will do things wrong. Mistakes happen along the way. How do you both navigate the challenges, but also find the opportunities in those moments where the learning points happen? Charlotte, if we could start with you on this one, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, can we use the example of pronouns that we usually have a little chat about, joke about?
Absolutely, yeah, we'll absolutely do that. I screw up Roy. I had a whole, for context, I had a whole podcast with Charlotte where I avoided the she. And I thought, I've nailed this. My 47-year-old white guy brain has nailed this now. I know this stuff. We got up on stage at an event in Manchester and the she bomb came out. And oh, good God. She knows. I said straight afterwards, I said, she said straight away after I said, look, I didn't do that. Any intent. I'd try it. I'd do my best. But I think there's something in that as well, isn't there, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the perfect example, which is why I wanted to use it, because, from like, when you're speaking to someone whether they're being a dick about it or not. And I think if someone's got that headspace to learn and accept those challenges, and I think it's all about education and listening to the story. But yeah, that's why I wanted to use that example, because it's a great example of by no intent you were doing that on purpose. And we chat about it and have a joke about it ever since. But I think it does go back to education of stories and listening to the person. It's not fundamentally, it's not about you, it's about that person and making their life a little bit easier, or making them feel more included, and things like that. So they are challenging, some of those scenarios, but it's also the opportunity to learn with people, not necessarily lecture to them, because then they won't listen, but it's more about learning with them.
Absolutely, and I think that's the reason why questioning normals has such an important part to play in this, but also potentially, because it is a challenging thing, that could also kind of make people feel a little bit kind of like, ooh, kind of this, because not wrong in that sense, but actually you could be highlighting things, you will be highlighting things that could be better in that sense. And I think sometimes that's quite difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, for sure. And I think using the word wrong, but I think sometimes people do feel attacked if they're wrong. And like I said, it's just more about moving forward together, really.
How much do you think that, Charlotte, this taps into our relationship with change generally? That generally, when we experience change, we automatically get a bit kind of, oh, change. It's going to be really
People
yeah.
don't like it, do they? But I think like actually most of the time, like I used to get quite funny about what desk I sat at the office, and then when there was like talks of like office moves or changing around, I was like, can I just not, please? But actually, when I moved, it might have been a better environment to work in. And so I think people get used to change, that they just don't necessarily like it to begin with.
Absolutely, thank you. Gamu as well, please.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge for me is probably tokenism. That's probably the biggest challenge I've had to navigate. There is a big difference between being included based on merit versus superficially, because I check diversity boxes for a certain organization. But I think it's also very important, just like Charlotte said, the education side of things, raising awareness about what this means to people like me is so important. So I have to maintain an open mind. I'm always open to conversation. I think sometimes people can naturally shut down and sort of pull away and sort of think, and maybe feel aggravated by scenarios like that. But I always think it's an opportunity to have a conversation, because there is a chance that the person on the other side of the table didn't quite understand what that felt like for me. So education is at the heart of my philosophy of doing business. So I always think they have to go hand in hand with any progress that we're trying to achieve. There's got to be that willingness to come to the table and talk openly and not be afraid, as you were saying at the start, Nick, to ask questions because you're worried about what the response will be or what I might think of the question. I actually quite respect the question, because at least you want to find out. And likewise, I'd like to understand what was your thinking behind, say, wanting to put me on this said board, for example, and hopefully we come to a consensus. And it's the only way forward. I think we have to keep the door open, and we have to keep talking.
Absolutely. I think maybe we train, certainly from a young age, we train people not to be curious in that sense. That if you look at the world of money and financial planning, for example, a talk that I did last year for the Institute of Financial Wellbeing, one of the biggest kind of early memories around money was, don't ask your uncle how much his new car is, or don't ask how much people earn, or don't ask this and don't ask that. And so you kind of, we're taught not to be curious. We feel ashamed for not knowing things, but then we feel the guilt of, we should know these things. So again, asking questions, absolutely. I mentioned it last week, that last week was so bittersweet that I had, for the past few weeks, I've had 3 chest infections, go figure. So I'm still here, and we are 34 minutes in, so we're doing well. First day back today. But it felt so bittersweet because I was watching the Olympics and the community, and just felt everything was together. There was so much kind of a fun factor, very together. Everyone pulling together, even the opposing athletes were pulling together, a lot of team spirit. And then you flick onto Sky News, and due to misinformation from the really sad event that happened in Southport of the killings, that because of misinformation, suddenly there were people out on the streets, and it became a huge kind of race issue, culture issue, even potential like a demographic issue around kind of class as well. That came into, and it just felt such a big clash for me. And I think therein lies the challenge, that we have the ingredients, but very often the recipe can kind of go out of order. And social media is certainly one of those things that can change and influence that through the use of misinformation. You both experience misinformation through things like social media, and whether it's uneducated comments, as you mentioned, Charlotte, or whether it's just outright kind of racism or any form of homophobia, for example. How do you begin to champion inclusivity in each of your worlds, but also celebrate the diversity as well? Because I think that's the bit that we kind of miss. That very often you'll see people on the side of the fence that you're sitting that will celebrate the diversity of people, even people that you don't understand. You could appreciate people's thoughts, but you don't seem to have it the other way around. I appreciate it's a really rambling question, but I love your thoughts on that, because for me, it felt such an extreme of where we are as a society right now. Can you share your insights on that, each of you? And whoever wants to start first, please do.
Charlotte, go ahead.
I'll go ahead. I think one of the most powerful things that one of my black friends said to me was that their race is always on show. And so, for example, if you've got a disability, you could have a hidden disability, but for race, it's always there. And that really made me or allowed me to think that actually, in the situation and the events that happened, last week and forever, to be honest, that it's hard to comprehend that sometimes. So I think there's potential there when it's, when you want to celebrate the diversity, I think people get scared of doing it wrong or saying the wrong thing. When actually, you just need to say it and you'll learn by doing what you're doing, and changing the world fundamentally. But yeah, I think they can go hand in hand, but I think there is definitely hesitation somewhere where you can be an ally for a community, but you might be scared of doing it wrong, and I think that's why people hold back.
Yeah, and we've spoken about honesty and vulnerability in other contexts today. We do around here as well. Naheed, thank you very much for your comment. And sometimes we need to say it for what it is. In this instance, Islamophobic racism. There absolutely is a need to call things what they are, but we do tend to shy away from that, especially in the mainstream as well. I certainly find that, Gamu, again, this kind of more plays into your experiences, as you mentioned, and I've heard you spoke about many times before, in terms of race and culture and crossing cultures as well. Can you shine a little light on this, please?
Yeah, so I think we need to develop our tolerance muscles. I think naturally when we see difference, sometimes our brains trick us into thinking it's a threat, just because it's something unfamiliar, when in reality, you're absolutely fine. And then we sort of exaggerate that feeling of being threatened and then act on that. And I think that's what we see when you see the groupthink that's happened around the riots, and people just kind of responding really violently to an isolated incident and sort of generalizing it across a community of people that have absolutely nothing to do with that sort of violence. So I think tolerance for me has got to be, when we try to be more tolerant, I think part of that is listening, listening to understand rather than listening to respond. I think a part of that is developing our empathy as well, for human beings, regardless of color. As Charlotte is saying, you can see someone looks different. Doesn't mean that because one person who's, done something wrong that looks like that everybody else that looks the same is going to behave the same way. So it's about challenging our unconscious bias as well, I think, and the stereotypes about people. So it's not an easy thing to do. One of my favorite things to say to my white friends is, how about going somewhere where you're the minority, and just detailing what that experience was like. And I think that's one way to help you to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of somebody who's always minority, not by choice, because, we're in this country. And I think that helps with the empathy and the kind of awareness of what that's actually like for somebody else.
Thank you both. I've loved your insights. It's been fascinating. Yeah. This could go on a lot longer, to be fair.
Yeah, I know.
In episode 2, we're going to be lined up. And again, thanks to Naheed for putting that in the comments box. We will come back to any open questions soon. And from us, a little bit of parting wisdom from the three of us, if you want to leave some. I guess from my perspective, as I mentioned right at the start, but I always say this, is don't be afraid to ask better questions. I certainly feel, again, as Naheed says, that honesty point is that vulnerability point, that actually to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know anything about this, or I don't understand this, or even sometimes your old biases can run wild, the ones that we've been handed down to us. And I think that's the thing. If we don't understand something, we either go completely against it, or we go completely all in, not knowing what we're agreeing with. And I think equally unhealthy, fueled by cancel culture for sure, fueled by social media. I think we're all terrified of asking better questions. Don't be afraid to ask better questions. If you ask somebody that you know, somebody you don't know, but somebody that knows their stuff, with a genuine need to be curious or to educate yourself, they will very often, in fact, in my experience, every single time, ask you. They do not punch you in the face yet. So that's a good starting point. Choose your people up, by the way. And Gamu, some parting wisdom for you, please.
Sure. I think for me, what I like to say to everyone, it's so easy to place people in boxes, drawing lines and creating sides, that them and us sort of culture. But really, the truth is we all actually have so much more in common than the differences between us. And when you get to know people that appear different at first, actually, you'll find out that actually, on a human level, we are also similar. So get curious, listen actively as someone else shares their personal experience and be an ally.
Thank you. Laura, thank you very much for your question. I'll come back to that in a second, and we'll make sure we address that for you. But it's a great question. Thank you. Charlotte, parting wisdom.
Yeah, difficult one after both of you have gone again. Yeah, I would say definitely those things. I think for me it's about education and open-mindedness. And you both said ask the question, like 100% ask the question, and you might ask it not in the right way, use inverted commas there, but you're going to learn from that. So I think, yeah, definitely keep asking the question, be open-minded. And yeah, don't be scared to ask a question, because actually you're probably going to learn quite a bit from it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you as well. I'm very pleased to have you both in my entourage. So we will come back to the room for any questions now. If you're watching on the recording, I'll give you a place to reach us, and that place is team@forgingpeople.com. If you want to email us any questions that you have, I will make sure that they reach the appropriate person. And also join us tomorrow if you are able. The recording will be on catch up within the next 24 hours following this session as well. And it's effective communication with diverse audiences. If you are or know somebody who does engage with diverse audiences, I have two amazing people to deliver. Dr. Alex Blower, who does a lot of work with men's mental health, championing young boys in education, especially boys from disadvantaged backgrounds. Sarah Hunt is a conference yoga instructor. That's way out of my comfort zone. But it's all about engaging different people in different ways. If you want to join us tomorrow for that event, same time, and it's free to attend, but the recording will be available. If you do want to come along, drop me a message in the chat box now, and I'll make sure I book you on for tomorrow. And if you want to reach me directly, it's nick@nickelston.com. It doesn't go to anybody else apart from me, so your questions are completely confidential. You can join me on LinkedIn, my YouTube channel, where the recording will be. My website has lots of different links to that, and the Nick Elston Show has episodes with Gamu and with Charlotte over the course of the seasons it's been running. So a big thank you to everybody who's joined us live. I'm going to stop the recording now and come back to the room. Thank you.